airport reopened, people moving around, occasional gunshots possibly, but certainly the situation is much better. But the conflict is now spreading around the country. So the rebels control the town of Bor, you just mentioned, just to the north of Juba, Bentiu, which is the capital of the oil-producing Unity State, some oil fields there too, we believe, and there's fighting in Upper Nile too, which is another area with a large concentration both of oil fields and of people from the same ethnic group as the former Vice President Riek Machar, who's leading this rebellion.
What about these reports of atrocities?
There clearly have been atrocities, and it's difficult.
On both sides or one side?
I think on both sides. A lot of the reporting at the moment is coming out of Juba for very obvious security and logistical reasons. And the particular interviews are taking place at the UN base where many people, particularly Nuer from Riek Machar's ethnic group, have fled. They're telling of massacres against them, of abuses against them, and I think there's compelling evidence that those abuses have taken place. But it's also true to say that Nuer have killed Dinka, the people from Salva Kiir's ethnic group, and this often out of the control of politicians. These are armed civilians in many cases operating, though it appears there have been abuses by the armed forces too.
That warning last week led by President Obama that civil war is imminent. Is there any suggestion that somehow there's a potential for reconciliation or at least calming down this very clear anger, which is both tribal and within the military?
Yes, and political too. Look, there are calls for a Christmas truce, something in the spirit of Christmas.
But is anyone taking any notice?
Well, not so far. There are regional mediation efforts as well as the American ones, attempts to get dialogue going. Now, the President has said he's prepared for unconditional dialogue, but the Vice President wants several prominent politicians who were arrested at the beginning of this violence released and taken to a safe place before he's prepared to commit to talks.
And is it clear whether this is now ethnic, tribal, or just simply limited to factions within the military, the politics of this?
Look, I think it's a little bit of everything. At the beginning, there's a political rivalry, a political thirst for power. President Kiir wanted to stay in power and became increasingly authoritarian. People opposed to him were desperate to get power by any means necessary. So that's the context, but people's power bases in South Sudan are often ethnic, there are ethnic tensions, and so what a political fight is spreading into an ethnic clash too.
There we can see one of the UN bases with a UN helicopter and the UN and the very typical blue, which is very clearly indicative of the UN presence. What could maybe 4,000 or 5,000 peacekeepers, if they can be assembled from somewhere at short notice, what could they do?
What the UN has been doing up until now is protecting civilians who have come to their base. And in one case, a small UN base was overrun in the town of Akobo by armed Nuer youth, and civilians killed, UN peacekeepers were killed. Elsewhere, the UN has been able to hold firm. What the UN hasn't been able to do is patrol cities, come in between warring parties. And I think even with 5,000 extra peacekeepers, they wouldn't be able to do that either.